So in that gospel reading, there's, that question, hey, who are you? Who are you really? Have any of you here, have you ever been mistaken for someone else? Has anyone ever come up to you and said, hey, and then they realized that, that's not the person I thought. You've had that happen to you? Tom Cruise, right? No?
Actually, John Chrétien.
John Chrétien. I believe you. I believe you. Anyone else? No one wants Marianne Chrishell. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's okay. That's good. Yeah. And you? And they think you're Gwen. Oh boy. I can't remember that really ever happening to me where someone mistook me, came up to me saying, hey, are you? And I can't remember that ever happening in that way, although I can remember when we were still living up north and we'd come back home, my folks were living, where my mom is still now at her condominium in Oak Bank. Oak Bank, yes, Oak Bank. And some of the old ladies there, Joey Flip It On, they would say, boy, your son looks like Tom Jones. And I didn't know whether to be flattered or afraid, But, you can get it off now. Just fade to black. There was one time where I had been mistaken for someone else, but not quite in that way. It was actually through the mail. I'd received a letter from the city of Winnipeg, and it's almost unbelievable in a way, but it really is true. I wouldn't come up here and tell you something that was fabricated or whatever, at least not intentionally. But I got a letter in the mail, and it was a bill. It was a long list of parking violations that had been sent to me. I've had a parking violation or two, but not a long list like this. And it had my name on it, and I was about 20 years of age at the time, and it had my address, everything like that was right, and I'm looking at this, and I can't remember the dollar amount, but it kind of put my heart in a start there. I was like, is it possible that I got these tickets and unaware of? And then I started looking down, and it actually had the vehicle that was vehicles. There's two vehicles that were listed that were connected to these parking tickets, and one was an Astrovan. They were really kind of big back in the day, and that I didn't own an Astrovan, and then one was a sports car, and it was a very nice sports car, and I knew that okay, now it's all out. That isn't me, because what I was driving was a Dodge Omni. I can't even remember the year. I think it was a '79. I could walk to the passenger door and bang it, and the window would drop, and it was not, and it was running on 2 cylinders too. Before the car finally passed away, and there was a mistaken identity there, I suppose. I called the city, and we worked it out quick enough, and I received this letter to Tom Baker. That is me, and they got straightened out quick enough that the fault was theirs. It was, although the name and the address was what it was actually for Tom Baker, just not me. A different one living in the city, I suppose. And so, it was a mistaken identity, but I always would wonder, who was that other Tom Baker? Who was he, man? And I never did ever find that one out. But in John chapter 10, we have this kind of a question that is being swirling around there too. There's a number of Jewish people who are surrounding Jesus, and they're listening to him speak, and he's speaking in and around the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. That's like these columns, right? So I almost kind of liken it like this grand atrium area where he's gathering, and people are listening, and all kinds of things are being said, and there is this mystery that followed Jesus everywhere he would go, and there was an array of questions that would come at him, probably from a wide variety of different topics too, and there was never a question that ever left him lost for words. And that's sort of key too, because there was a certain group of people who really wanted to get him in a place where he would be lost for words. And it never happened. And he often would respond with words or questions that were either rhetorical or they were introspective, that would make a person think deeper about themselves or deeper about life, deeper about the things of God and of God's love for them, and just how far-reaching the love of God is and to whom it falls upon. And so the frequent question that so many of the Jewish people had and were asking of themselves and to Jesus directly was, who is he? Who is this extraordinary man? Who is he? And what is he about? What is his agenda? He's got to be up to something. What's his angle? Who is Jesus really? And they wanted to know so badly who he was. And there was a group that knew that he was from Nazareth, and they knew that his dad had been a carpenter. They knew that, and they knew that his mother was Mary, and that only added further to his mystery because, I suppose, of his beginnings. He was born to a teenage unwed mom, and maybe that's a bit sketchy. And yet he was so well versed in the scriptures, and he was so learned in the old law. And where in the wide world did he learn to communicate as effectively as he did? So creative, and the signs and wonders that followed him wherever he was. Where did he come from, and by what and by whose authority did he do what he did that would enable him to perform the miracles that he did and to proclaim the words that he would proclaim? And there were some others, they were convinced. From what they had heard, from what they had seen, they were convinced that Jesus, he had to be the Messiah. He had to be the one that was spoken of from the Old Testament, from the old ancient writings that they had before them. And there were others, though, they weren't so convinced of that. That wasn't proof to them. They were skeptical. And some said that for him to do what he could do in the miraculous way, or in that signs and wonder-ish sort of way, and to say what he would say, there had to be something to him. He had to be possessed by a demon, is what some had said. But did that really stand to reason? Could a demon open the eyes of the blind? And that miracle of the blind receiving sight was still a miracle that may have been fresh in their minds, because just in the preceding chapter, in John chapter 9, that is what Jesus did. He had healed a blind man. Could a demon do that? Well, that didn't seem to be reasonable. So then he had to be a blasphemer. That's what he had to be. He had to be a blasphemer. But even to conclude that, could a blasphemer have that kind of power and authority? And who was he? And so they asked straight out, read for us in verse 24 by Aaron, if you are the Christ, tell us plainly. And it's unclear here how much time has elapsed from the preceding verses, in verses 1 through 21 of chapter 10, where Jesus speaks about the Good Shepherd, which allegorizes the relationship between God the Father and of the Messiah, who is the Good Shepherd, and the sheep in their care, which are people. And now here in verses 22 to 30, some of the Jewish bystanders, they've won an answer, and they begin to press him for an answer. And would you just settle this once and for all? Who are you? If you are the Messiah, just tell us. Tell us plainly. But you know what? And this is what I think. And I don't think I'm wrong. Whatever answer Jesus would give was not going to settle the debate here. It would not settle it. It wouldn't be over. They would cry blasphemer if he came right out and say, yes, I am the Messiah. I'm the one I am that. And I think that because the trail up to this point here in John chapter 10 is evident of that. Jesus heals a blind man, and what happens in that story, if you can remember it, that blind man is interrogated. He's dragged before the Pharisees, and they ask him this question, who healed you? How long have you been blind? And they find out that he had been blind since birth. And they listen to this blind man's story, and they say to him, this is really impossible, being blind from birth and receiving your sight. That's impossible. And the blind man says, well, yeah, I know, but all I can tell you is that I was blind since birth, and now I see. Well, who do you think the person was that healed you? Because the man you say who had healed you, he's not from God. He's a sinner. And he healed you. And look at the day he heals you on. He heals you on the Sabbath day, for goodness sakes. The day reserved for the Lord. So, blind man, you tell me, you tell us, who do you think he is? And the blind man says, well, he said he was a prophet. And the Jews, the Pharisees, they wouldn't believe that the blind man had been born blind. They refused to believe that. And so they go to their next step of their interrogation, and they meet with this blind man's parents, and they kind of go through the same questions. Was your son really blind since birth? And they confirm the story. And so the point I'm making here is that whatever Jesus would say or do, his words and actions were constantly and always up for interpretation. Jesus heals a blind man, the blind receiving sight, one of the telltale signs that the kingdom of God has come. And how do the skeptics respond to that? Well, he's a fraud. because that's impossible. He's a fraud. He's a sinner. And look at the day he heals on, the Sabbath of all days. He's a sinner. So there's tension. There's an existing tension. And it's a tension that often will stem from misperceptions. And misperceptions of how big and how vast and how wonderfully free our God is. And can we allow ourselves to be surprised by God today? Will we allow ourselves to be surprised by God today? Because it would seem to me that miracles are constantly being tried and explained away. This was so in the ancient world, and I think it still is today, whether it's the miracle of creation or when a person without sound medical explanation is freed from their physical illness, or even when reconciliation happens between people where it looks like there is no hope for that to ever happen. Constant pessimism washes away the wonder. And pessimism, came across a really neat quote. I actually used it on a sign once. Pessimism needs a good, swift kick in the cans. I like that. Because our God is the God of who makes the impossible become possible. And I wonder this too, and I say this directly to myself as much as anyone, maybe even more so. If Jesus were to show up on our doorstep, would he be recognized? When the impossible or miraculous happens, when prayers are answered, does it move? Does it move us all over again, over what God has done, over who God is? And there is this existing tension over what makes sense in to our finite and limited scope of understanding and perception, an existing tension between what we are able to perceive through reason and logic and faith. And you know what? It is only the eyes of faith that will enable one to see truth, the truth concerning Jesus and his work and his initiatives. But you know what? Jesus did respond to the question when he was asked who he was. He did give them a reply. Who are you? And Jesus answers, I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me, but you do not believe because you are not among my sheep. If Jesus had just said yes to the answer, or to the question, are you the Christ, would that have been enough for the critics of that day? Would it have been enough? Would it have done it for them? It was enough for John the Baptist, though. In prison, he sends some of his people to go, and he hears of this Jesus, and he sends some of his people to go and seek Jesus out and ask and see if he is the one or if they should expect another. And Jesus speaks with these fellows, with these disciples of John the Baptist, and he says, you go back with this message. Go and tell John what you hear and see. This is from Matthew 11. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them, and blessed is the one who is not offended by me. That was enough for John. But really, the Jewish people who were skeptical and hostile, there was no answer that would have done it for them. They simply wanted him to say yes so that they could then charge him with blasphemy and then do away with them. And yet the proof was there for everyone to consider. It was right before them. The testimony and the witness of the signs and wonders they were out. The blind received their sight. The lame walked. The lepers were healed. The deaf were being allowed to hear again. And even dead people were being raised up. And the poor were given hope and life. And these are all signs of the kingdom of heaven being at hand. And that God is at work among us. And how will people of the world today see Jesus today? How will the people of this world see Jesus today? So that they can find him and know him. And is it through signs and wonders still? I think sure. You know, although some will always try to explain away the supernatural and the wonders of some of the things in life, but there are those who do hear and witness some amazing and divine things. And what does it do for them is that it firms them in their confidence and their belief because of it, that there is a God, there is a Lord. And yet there's another way, I think, that gives proof and evidence of Jesus being in the world today. And I think it's this. It's through the Jesus who lives in you. We read from Acts chapter 9 today. Aaron read that. And it's a story of a lady's disciple by the name of Tabitha. And I want to want us to consider her story just for a moment. And she's described as a person who was full of good works and charity. That's how she's described. And she had passed away, and there were people that were gathered in her home, and they're in mourning. They're broken over this. And the mourners, we are told that some of them have within them, or have on their person, in their hands, tunics and other garments that Tabitha had made for them. And the people with these items in their hands are widows. And they are women in that community, from that community, who had experienced deep loss. And many of the widows from that culture, if not looked after well by their family, would have little means, if any at all, to support themselves. And we can reason that Tabitha, while alive, had a heart that went out to the broken women of her community. And her good works and her charity extended to them. It was being given away to them. And it was through the giving of herself that the world, her world, that was around her became a bit of a better place for those that surrounded her. Because the Spirit of Jesus was in her, and He shone through her. And how is one full of good works? One is full of good works when they give away of themselves. Their time, their resources perhaps, their compassion, their mercy. And really, when one is full of good works, it's straight and simply because they are filled with the very Spirit of Jesus. And Jesus shines when one of His disciples, who carry Him inside of them, they will be allowed to see injustice, depression, oppression, heartache, and it does something to them. It breaks their heart over it, because this is what breaks the heart of Jesus. And Tabitha reached out to the less privileged of her world, and it was the widows who had her heart. She couldn't reach all people. I don't think God expects any of us to do that. She couldn't reach all people, but it had been the widows whom God had placed on her heart, and she gave away the love that Jesus had given to her to them. And who are the less privileged? Well, from when we read here, they're described as the poor, the blind, the ill, the widows. And really, to know Jesus, to be a follower and disciple of Jesus, I think that's a privilege, that we are allowed to know Jesus and to know Him personally. I think that's a privilege. So then really, anyone who does not know Jesus personally could well be defined as being less privileged. And they are in our world. And we carry the light of Jesus in our hearts. So how does the love of God in you move within you? What does He move you to do? Because it's something for each of us. This past week, I was able to catch up with Clarence Mayert. And Clarence is spending his days Monday through Friday in the day program at Tabor Home. And he's very upfront, very clear that he'd rather be on the farm helping Vaughn with the farming. He had said that after all, Vaughn had helped him for so many years, and now that he was retired, he could give back some of his time to Vaughn. Really, he just wants to, when farming is in somebody, it's in them deep, isn't it? And I think that speaks to a lot of you that are here, country people. When the country is in you, it's in you deep. But he likes the day program. I'm sure at times it's a love-hate relationship for him, but he likes the day program. He likes the food, he says. He likes the staff, and he likes the people who go to day program as he does. And he likes his handy van drivers and the residents that he has met at Tabor Home. And life is not exactly like he would like for it to be for himself, but he says it's good still. And he mentioned some of the people whom he had met. And he shared with me that some of the residents, and he said that some of the residents here, they have it really bad. And he was referring to some of the conditions and illnesses that some were suffering with. And to Clarence, his eyes began to well up with tears as he managed to say and to get out, "I feel so sorry for them," is what he had said. His heart breaks for the suffering souls that he has met. Well, what could he do to alleviate the suffering? Something that he's already doing and he's unaware of it. Just sitting across the table and having coffee with them where he can, talking and visiting and socializing with them, loving them, really. But we're all in that place sometimes. What can I really do with some of the situations that are out there? What can I really do for some of the people that I know in my life that are really needing a special something from God? I think everything begins with a prayer. I think everything does. Lord, love those people. Help Help them and give them peace, give them hope, give them a reassurance. I think that's where it always begins is, Lord, please show your mercy and your love. And in time, I'm also convinced of this, that prayer begins to change. Because our hearts are being shaped and they are being molded because they are gripped by God's grace. And that prayer then becomes, Lord, what can I do? Lord, what would you have me to do? Show me how I can share the love that you have given to me to the one that you have placed on my heart. And maybe it is this. Maybe God would simply have you prayed more because heaven knows we need more prayer warriors in the world today. Maybe God will speak to you in your spirit, assisting you to discern what good works and charity need to go from you, out from you to another. Whatever it is, God will put it in your heart. And maybe he has already. And through you, the Spirit of Jesus will shine. And there isn't going to be any mistaken identity. They will be clear to whom you belong to, that you are a follower of God, a disciple of Jesus Christ, and he's in you. He has created you for his glory, and he's in you, and he will shine through you. You know that one hymn, I'd rather have Jesus? Doesn't that say it all? I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. Let's sing verse 1 of I'd rather have Jesus, followed by the chorus, and then we'll carry right on into our closing song. I think it says it all. Let's sing together. I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather be his than have riches untold. I'd rather have Jesus than houses or lands. I'd rather be led by his nail-pierced hand than to be the king of a vast domain, or beyond in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today.